Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. What do you do when your HOA blocks a wheelchair ramp for your disabled father, then threatens $100 a day if you build it anyway? I tried permits, meetings, even medical documentation. Nothing worked. So I filed one complaint that made them panic, and suddenly their tone completely changed. Why? I never thought I'd become an expert on fair housing law, but when my HOA decided to play hardball over a wheelchair ramp, I didn't have much choice. My father had a stroke about 3 years ago. He was in his early 70s at the time, and while he survived, the stroke affected his mobility significantly. He could walk short distances with a walker, but stairs were basically impossible for him. He'd been living in an assisted living facility since his recovery, but the costs were eating through his savings faster than anyone had anticipated. My wife and I talked it over and agreed that he should move in with us. We had the space. Our house is a single-story ranch with 3 bedrooms, and our kids were already grown and out of the house. The problem was that our front entrance had 3 steps leading up to the door, and there was no way my father could navigate them safely. I started looking into wheelchair ramps. I called a few contractors and got quotes. The costs ranged from about $4,000 to $7,000 depending on materials and complexity. I settled on a mid-range option with a contractor who had good reviews and experience with accessibility modifications. Here's where the HOA comes in. I live in a planned community with about 200 homes. Like a lot of these neighborhoods, we have a homeowners association that manages common areas and enforces rules about what you can and can't do with your property. I'd never had issues with them before. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn trimmed, didn't paint my house purple. The usual stuff. I knew I'd need to get approval for the ramp, so I started by reviewing the HOA's covenants and architectural guidelines. The documents were dense and full of legal language, but the gist was that any exterior modification required written approval from the Architectural Review Committee before construction could begin. Fair enough. I figured I'd submit my plans, they'd approve them, and that would be that. I also knew I needed to get a building permit from the county. The contractor helped me with that part. We designed a ramp that met county codes with the right slope, handrails on both sides, all the stuff it needed to pass inspection. The contractor knew all the requirements since he'd built dozens of these ramps before. I submitted my permit application to the county first. After the required inspections and reviews, they approved it. That gave me confidence that the HOA would approve it too, since it was already meeting all the official building codes. I prepared my submission to the HOA. I included the county-approved plans, photos of similar ramps, a letter explaining why the modification was necessary, and a timeline for construction. I dropped it off at the management company's office on a Tuesday afternoon and was told I'd hear back within 30 days. 2 weeks later, I received a response. It was a form letter stating that my request had been denied. The reason given was vague, something about the modification not being in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the community. That was it. No detailed explanation, no suggestions for alternatives, just a flat denial. I was frustrated but figured maybe I hadn't provided enough information. I revised my submission and included more details about my father's medical situation and why the ramp was necessary. I explicitly stated that this wasn't just a cosmetic choice but a medical necessity. I resubmitted everything. Another 2 weeks passed. The response was the same. Denied. This time there was a bit more detail. The committee felt that wheelchair ramps should be placed at rear entrances to maintain the curb appeal of front facades. This was where I started to get angry. Our house doesn't have a rear entrance that would work. The back of our house leads to a sliding glass door that opens to our patio, and the patio itself is elevated with a significant drop to the yard. Building a ramp there would cost 3 times as much and would require my father to go through our bedroom to access it, which made no sense. The front entrance was the only practical option. I did some research online and found forums where people talked about HOA disputes. That's when I started learning about fair housing laws. I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but I read enough to understand that there are federal laws that protect people with disabilities. Basically, HOAs have to allow necessary modifications even if they'd normally be against the rules, as long as the request is reasonable. I found stories from other people who dealt with similar situations, and it seemed like my case was pretty straightforward. I decided to submit a formal, reasonable accommodation request. This wasn't just another architectural approval request, it was specifically invoking federal fair housing protections. I found a template online and adapted it to my situation. The letter explained my father's disability, the medical necessity of the ramp, why the front entrance was the only feasible location, and cited the relevant federal laws. I sent the letter via certified mail so I'd have proof of delivery. Then I waited. 3 weeks went by with no response. I called the management company and was told they'd forward my inquiry to the HOA's attorney. Another week passed. Finally, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney stating that my reasonable accommodation request had been reviewed and denied. The letter said the accommodation wasn't reasonable because alternative options existed, specifically the rear entrance I'd already explained wouldn't work. At this point, I decided I was done playing games. I consulted with a real estate attorney who had experience with fair housing issues. Her initial consultation was free, and after reviewing my documentation, she agreed to take my case. She said it was pretty clear-cut and that the HOA was on shaky legal ground. My attorney sent a letter to the HOA's attorney explaining why they were wrong. She was pretty confident we had a good case, but she also warned me this could take a while and that HOAs sometimes fight these things just because they can. She said we should file a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development regardless of their response because it would put pressure on them. My attorney filed the HUD complaint on my behalf. The complaint laid out the facts. My father's disability, the medical necessity of the ramp, the HOA's repeated denials, and their failure to provide a reasonable accommodation as required by law. While we waited for HUD to respond, I made a decision. My father needed to move in, and he couldn't wait months or years for this legal battle to resolve. The county had already approved my building permit. The only thing stopping me was the HOA, and I was now confident they were violating federal law. I told my contractor to start construction. The ramp went up over the course of 3 days. It was a sturdy wooden structure with pressure-treated lumber, painted to match our house trim. It looked professional and blended in well with the property. My father moved in that weekend. I knew the HOA would respond, and they did. Within a week, I received a violation notice in my mailbox. The letter stated that I had constructed an unauthorized modification and demanded that I remove it immediately. If I didn't comply within 14 days, I would be subject to fines. I didn't remove the ramp. 14 days later, I received another letter stating that I was being fined $100 per day until the violation was corrected. The fines would continue to accrue and could result in a lien being placed on my property. My attorney advised me not to pay the fines and not to remove the ramp. She said the HOA was retaliating against me for exercising my rights under fair housing law, which was itself another violation. Every letter they sent, every fine they assessed, was just more evidence for our case. The letters kept coming. After 3 months, they claimed I owed something like $10,000 in fines. The numbers kept going up with every letter they sent. I filed them all in a folder and sent copies to my attorney. Meanwhile, HUD was investigating. They sent a questionnaire to the HOA asking them to explain their policies on reasonable accommodations and why they denied my request. They also asked for copies of their architectural guidelines and any training materials provided to board members on fair housing law. I learned later that the HOA's responses to HUD were not great. They basically stuck to their position that the ramp violated aesthetic standards and that I should have used a rear entrance. They didn't seem to grasp that aesthetic standards don't trump federal disability rights laws. This whole thing dragged on for most of a year. Somewhere around the 8 or 9 month mark, things finally shifted. My attorney got a call from the HOA's attorney. Apparently, HUD's investigation wasn't going well for them. HUD had indicated that they were likely to find in my favor, which could result in penalties, mandatory policy changes, and potentially even a consent decree that would subject the HOA to federal oversight for years. The HOA wanted to settle. My attorney said this was common. Once HOAs realize they're going to lose, they usually prefer to settle quietly, rather than have a federal finding against them on the record. We negotiated the terms. The settlement covered everything we'd asked for. They dropped all the fines, paid my legal fees, which were around $8,000 or so, and agreed to hire someone to update their policies. My attorney made sure everything was in writing before I agreed to drop the HUD complaint. But here's the part that made this whole nightmare worthwhile: the policy changes. As part of the settlement, the HOA had to completely overhaul their approach to reasonable accommodation requests. From what I understand, the new policies basically flipped the script. Now the HOA has to prove why an accommodation is unreasonable instead of homeowners having to beg for approval. They also have to respond faster, and the board has to do fair housing training. There's a whole section now about accessibility modifications that basically says they should be approved unless there's a really good reason not to. The HOA also had to send a letter to every homeowner in the community explaining the new policy and informing them of their rights to request reasonable accommodations. I got a copy of that letter. It was pretty satisfying to read. One neighbor in particular became an unexpected ally through all this. She was on the HOA board, though not the president. She told me privately that she'd voted against denying my requests every time, but she'd been outvoted by the other board members. She said the president in particular had been stubborn about it, viewing any accommodation requests as special treatment that would set a bad precedent. After the settlement, she pushed hard for the policy changes to be even more comprehensive than required. The training that the board members had to attend apparently opened some eyes. The woman who ran the training session was a fair housing attorney, and according to my neighbor ally, she didn't pull any punches. She went through case after case of HOAs that had been sued, fined, or put under consent decrees for violating fair housing laws. The message was clear. You cannot deny reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities, period. The president of the HOA ended up resigning about 6 months after the settlement. I don't know if it was directly related, but the timing was interesting. The new president was much more reasonable and actually apologized to me at a community meeting. She said the board had made mistakes and that they were committed to doing better. My father lived with us for 2 more years before he passed away. During that time, the ramp gave him something the assisted living facility had slowly taken from him: independence. He could come and go without waiting for someone to help him. He could sit on the front porch in the evenings. He could take short walks around the neighborhood with his walker. He could feel like a person living in a home, not a problem being managed. That alone would have made the fight worth it. But the policy changes helped other people too. About a year after my case was resolved, another family requested grab bars in a bathroom for an elderly parent. Approved within a week. Then someone requested a wider driveway and parking pad for a wheelchair-accessible van. Approved. A family with an autistic child requested a taller fence for safety reasons. Approved. Under the old board, every one of those requests probably would have turned into a fight. Under the new policy, they were treated like what they were: reasonable accommodations for people who needed them. I still live in the same house. The ramp is still there, even though I do not need it anymore. I thought about removing it after my father passed, but I decided to leave it. It is not hurting anything, and you never know when someone visiting might need it. Plus, it reminds me of what the whole fight was actually about. After my father passed, I went through his belongings and found a journal he had been keeping. In one entry, he wrote about the ramp. He wrote that it made him feel less like a burden and more like he still had some independence. He wrote about sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching neighbors walk by, and feeling like part of the community again. I sat there with that journal in my hands and cried. The HOA saw a ramp and thought it hurt curb appeal. My father saw a ramp and got part of his life back. The ramp is just wood and metal. But what it represented— dignity, independence, accessibility— was worth fighting for. And because of that fight, the next person who needs help in this neighborhood might not have to fight so hard. That is the real victory. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened over 5 years ago, and it still ticks me off whenever I think about it. Also, sorry about how long this is, LOL. I was 17 working at a big theme park and had been working there for the better part of the year. I had quickly picked things up and was usually regarded as the responsible one on the team when it was just a bunch of us teens working a ride. We had a college student intern lead who was not good at leading or training new hires. We'll call him M. At my main ride, it required 3 people minimum to operate. 1 person in the control booth, 1 at the entrance gate, and 1 at the exit. However, we could have 4 or 5 if we were incredibly busy to help deal with the line. The people in the booth and at the entrance could not see the person at the exit directly, so we used radios. The control booth also had a camera on the exit gate. From day 1 on the job, we were taught hand signals in case the radio dies or for quick communication. These signals were universal across the entire park. That summer, 3 freshly certified kids— we had to take tests to prove we paid attention to training— started the ride with someone locked inside the fence, aka not in a seat. Twice it was another employee, once it was a guest, which was a huge deal. The thing with those incidents was that those in the control booth didn't notice their mistake until the others screamed at them to hit the E-stop. Those new hires were either retrained or moved to a simpler ride. Well, one incredibly busy day, there were 5 of us running things. Me, M, and 3 others. M had been called over to another ride, which normally wasn't an issue. About an hour later, someone was scheduled to go home and M hadn't come back yet. I called the other ride and asked them to send him back. We could have run things with 3 of us, but it was super busy and we really needed a 4th. A few minutes later, someone, not our lead, was sent over to take over. Weird, but no big deal. Another hour or so went by, someone else needed to go home. I called again asking for M. Also, all the radio's batteries were dead, dying. Things had slowed down, so I, being the spare 4th person, took the radios to the office to get fresh batteries. This took less than 10 minutes, and in that time, the guys had switched to hand signals as we were trained. When I came back, our lead had once again sent over someone else to take his spot. At this point, I realized that M was probably just shooting the crap in the nice air-conditioned booth at the other ride. Now, the guy that got sent over to us was normally at a roller coaster and hadn't been at this ride in over a month, so I gave him a quick review and he took controls. I turned around for maybe 30 seconds when I hear yelling. I turn around and the ride was stopped maybe 3 feet off the ground with our entrance guy locked in the fence. The guy at controls saw what he did and hit the E-stop, something that the other screw-ups that summer did not think to do. We had to call upper management, and wouldn't you know, M came running over. This time the highest of the higher-ups came over as well. They pulled each of us aside and interrogated us, which was odd, then walked away and talked for like half an hour. They then fired the guy at controls on the spot, and came up with BS reasons to get the rest of us removed from running rides. They absolutely were only doing that to make an example of us. I tried to rip into M for shirking his duties, but as an anxiety-ridden kid, it didn't hit very hard. I was mainly pissed off that they fired the poor guy who never should have been there in the first place. Remember I took the already dead radios earlier? They tried to say I had removed communication devices from the ride area, which prevented them from letting controls know they were outside the gate. They were basically trying to pin the whole thing on me. Total bull BC. This happened after I brought them back. I assume M threw me under the bus for being in charge while he wasn't there. Also, we had hand signals. I tried explaining that to them, but they didn't give a crap. I refused to sign the paperwork, which would be admitting fault, so this fight was stretched over multiple days. Plus, I was leaving for college in like 2 weeks and didn't want to spend my last days of summer cleaning bathrooms. They gave us a new rule. If a single radio was dying, we had to call a manager to fetch us a new battery, even if we had people to spare to go grab one instead. If a radio died, we had to close the ride. Managers roamed around the whole area and were responsible for so much, so if you called them and it wasn't urgent, it could take a long time for them to show up. The next day, my radio was dying. I called the manager. Half hour goes by. I call again. My radio died. I shut down the ride. The people in the over an hour line got pissed. I explained to people that we had to close because of the radios. Naturally, they got even more pissed BC of how stupid that was. Manager shows up minutes later. I took the battery from him with a smile on my face and he left without saying a word. After many complaints, management was magically fine with us using hand signals again. I never signed that paperwork. I left for college, and funny enough, M also went to the same college. I ran into him once. He just kinda nodded at me. I gave him a dirty look and I never saw him again. The next summer, I was rehired by the park as a lead and actually did my damn job. The next one is an entitled people story. So, I am an English teacher at a secondary school. Recently, I had an encounter with a set of entitled parents who seemed to think the world revolved around their child's convenience, their child's wants, and my schedule. Their child is not even in my class. She is in another teacher's class. That teacher and I get along very well, and we both put a lot of effort into making sure students are supported. The issue is that this student still has contact with a previous teacher, and that does not help her actual teacher at all. Her current teacher tries hard, but the student is rude, makes demands, disrupts lessons, and tells her teacher to her face that she will just ask the previous teacher to help her instead. Whatever the current teacher does, it does not seem to work. She genuinely wants to help the student, but she also sets proper boundaries. Apparently, the parents did not like how their child's actual teacher was doing her job, so they contacted me instead. That still surprises me, because the previous teacher was apparently the student's absolute favorite. What surprises me even more is that they contacted me. I have never taught this student. But it seems I have a reputation. They started by asking if I could just give a bit of extra help after class. I checked my timetable, but I was already stretched thin with marking, supervision, my own classes, and my other duties. I also contacted the actual teacher to see if she knew about this request. She did not. That bothered me. If one of my students does not understand my way of explaining something, I encourage them to ask other teachers. However, if they actually plan on doing that, I give the other teachers a heads up. Transparency matters. I do not want awkwardness between myself and my colleagues. I politely explained to the parents that I am not the student's assigned teacher. I told them that if their child needed help, they should contact her own teacher, who already knew her progress and could adjust lessons accordingly. I also explained that because of my timetable and other responsibilities, I did not have the time to facilitate extra support for a student who was not in my class. That was when the entitlement dial hit maximum. They told me their child does not work well with that teacher and that they expected me to take over the support because I was clearly the better English teacher. Yes, they actually said that. I reminded them firmly but professionally that all teachers are qualified and that I could not interfere with another colleague's class structure. Then came the real kicker. They demanded that I conduct their child's oral exam instead of her assigned teacher. Apparently, they did not trust the other teacher to grade fairly and wanted someone more competent. I calmly explained that oral exams are standardized across the department and must be done by the class teacher. That was not negotiable. I also explained that if it would ease their minds, we had camera equipment used by student teachers and we could set it up so another teacher could review the exam if needed. That way there would be no he said, she said discussion. It would be recorded. Again, transparency. Of course, they did not like that answer either. They tried to guilt trip me with comments like, "You care about students, do you not? And you do not want our child to fail, right?" I stayed firm, and from that point on, I copied the actual teacher into every email response. Then, a couple of days after my latest reply, the parents and the student apparently decided it would be a good idea to come find me in my classroom. At that moment, I was dealing with one of my own students who had just heard that her mother had been in a terrible car accident while coming to pick her up from school. The parents and student burst in, started making demands, talked loudly over each other, and refused to leave. At that point, I was done. Our educational assistant knew what I was dealing with and stepped in. Eventually, they left. After that, I escalated the whole situation to the student's mentor and department head. Our school has several departments such as care and welfare, building, green, cooking, and so on. I documented the emails, told them about the classroom visit, and let leadership handle it. Thankfully, the student's department head backed me up completely and reiterated the proper channels and boundaries. The parents then tried to file a formal complaint against me and the actual teacher. I found out when my own department head and the principal invited me in for a chat. They let me read the email. When I asked for their opinions, they just started laughing. They already knew what had happened and told me I had acted professionally, honestly, and correctly. I was told not to worry. The student and her parents would be having a meeting with them later that day. The message was basically the kind and professional version of, do not terrorize my teachers into doing your bidding while your own child is being disruptive and refusing help from the teacher who is actually trying to support her within professional boundaries. In the end, the student did the oral exam with her actual teacher as she was supposed to. From what I heard, she did a great job. The next one is an entitled parent story. For some background, I live with my mom and my siblings, who are 6 to 15 years older than me, and live with us on and off. Until I was 13, going to my dad's house on weekends felt like a kind of escape. One of my nieces, the oldest one, is only 4 years younger than me, and she also feels like an escape in a way. We both have difficult fathers, and we both hide our real selves from our parents because they are overbearing. That includes our genuine interests, hobbies, style, aesthetics, mental states, and things like that. As I said, I am the youngest of 5, and everyone is extremely protective of me, partly because I am the only one who is still a child. My siblings were not allowed to have phones until they were 13, which is a normal rule, but I got mine when I was 11 or 12 because of an incident at school in 6th grade. Until I actually turned 13, though, it was still considered the home phone. Even now, I only have the number of one friend saved in it, and I was scared about even having that because my mom once said I was not allowed to have anyone's number besides family members. I do not know if that rule still applies. For the first year I had my phone, my mom would randomly go through it and take it for about 30 minutes at a time. I still have a lot of anxiety about leaving my phone anywhere without keeping my eyes on it. This comes from when I was in 5th grade, and she went through my iPad, which was owned by my dad. She found my social media and tried to delete the apps I had. I will admit I was not allowed to have social media at the time, but I only used Snapchat for filters, Instagram to follow K-pop groups and actors, and TikTok the same way I openly use YouTube Shorts around her now. I was not posting anything or sharing personal information. She also went through my messages and group chats with friends and got mad at me for things they said, not even things I had said. I know I have mental health issues including social anxiety, other types of anxiety, and depression partly because of stress and my relationship with my mom. She chooses to ignore that. I also think I may have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, possibly autism, eating issues, and slight dyslexia, though I know dyslexia is not a mental health issue. I have always done well in English language arts, so I think it may be something that developed more recently. I saw someone refer to something similar as stealth dyslexia. Once I mentioned depression in passing, not even in reference to myself, and my mom responded by saying that I have too good of a life to have depression and that I am taken care of just fine. She also forces me to go places with her, especially social events, and makes me talk to people. When I say I struggle with making friends or even saying hello to people at school, she says I can speak to people just fine. She also says I am rude when I do not make conversation with family at events. The truth is, I hate social events and have had trouble interacting with strangers since childhood. When I was at least 5 years old, I used to want to leave the park if other people were there because I was scared they would try to talk to me. She also ignores the times I have mentioned having panic attacks and mental breakdowns at school and at home. She plays them off as me just being dramatic, which, to be fair, I can be emotional, but that does not mean I am making everything up. In private, I told one of the pediatricians I see with my 20-year-old sister that I might have social anxiety. I also told the doctor I did not want to talk to my mom about it. I am extremely scared for when my sister stops going to appointments with me because doctors give me a lot of anxiety. Dentists do not bother me as much, and neither does being at the hospital for scoliosis, but regular doctors make me very nervous. Besides ignoring my mental health, there are many other things she does, so I will try to summarize. If I complain about even the smallest thing, she turns it into a lecture about homeless people on the street or about how she grew up poor. It feels like she shuts down all of my feelings because of how she grew up. I wish she would realize that we are not the same person and that none of her kids are the same as her either. If I forget to clean my room or pick things up off the floor, she threatens to throw away all the clothes or items I left out. She also threatens to take away all of my electronics, including my phone, computer, and ability to use the television. I have extremely poor hygiene habits. I sometimes blame that on my sister, who only showers about twice a week, but I think mine may be connected to my mental health or possible other conditions. My mom just thinks I am lazy, disgusting, and that I like to live in filth. I have curly hair and am tender-headed, so when someone brushes my hair it hurts. When I react, people call me a crybaby and dramatic, and they say none of my other siblings turned out that way. There was also one time when I jokingly said, according to the Constitution, because I did not want to go to her nail lady's daughter's birthday party. The girl was turning 4 and I clearly did not want to go. My mom responded by saying that the Constitution and rights do not apply to me when it comes to her. I was later forced to go to another one of those parties a few months later. I am scared that one day she will go through my phone and find my YouTube, Pinterest, Webtoon, search history, love and deep space, and other things. She knows I have YouTube and Pinterest, but she does not know what is on them. There is nothing inappropriate in my search history, but I still do not want her going through it. I also try not to watch Korean dramas around her. I pause them when she comes into the room and only watch them on the television when she is at work. I also avoid playing The Sims 4 when she is home. My only time of partial freedom is when she is at work at night. Because of that, I stay up until around 11 at night, even though I have to wake up at 6 in the morning. I do it just so I can be myself for a little while, but it means I am sleep deprived every day. She says that is my fault and that I need to wear my glasses if my eyes burn because we use computers in most of our classes. But it is not just eye strain. I am tired because I stay up late to have time to feel like myself. I only got comfortable using my computer, which I received in 5th grade as a school award, and my phone as my own about a year or year and a half ago. Even now, I am still extremely cautious with certain things. I also cry very easily, so when I am genuinely crying about something, she calls me a crybaby and says crying does not do, help, or solve anything. She acts like she owns me and disregards my mental health, even though in many other ways she is a good parent. We have gone to Italy and on a Disney cruise in the past 5 years, but those things do not make up for what she has said or done emotionally. She has never physically hurt me, but the emotional side still affects me. Recently, I have been feeling extremely overwhelmed because I have been bottling up my real emotions and personality since I was around 12. I feel like I have to pretend to be super happy and energetic most of the time. Around my mom and siblings, I also act kind of dumb and cute because that is how they view me as the youngest. As a side note, whenever I mention how important hyphen is to me, she says I am lying or overreacting, even though I am not joking. They genuinely matter to me. I am 14 and in high school. We are lower middle class if that helps give context. I am not comfortable sharing any of this with my mom because I know she would either yell, get mad, or say I am just being dramatic. If more information is needed, please ask. I wrote this in an incognito tab on my phone while she was at work, and this account was made with my secret email. I also thought this part was kind of funny. While we were on an actual airplane, she looked over at my phone while I was playing Love in Deep Space and said, "Who is Caleb? Is he a real person? Why are you messaging him?" I do not even like Caleb. I never have, not even before he became a love interest. I kept explaining that he was not real, that the messages were just part of the game to unlock things, and that it was a game I play with my sister, who we had just gone to visit. A few weeks later, I took a picture of a conversation my main character had with Xavier. Our Google Photos are connected because my mom's email is on my phone, although some pictures do not sync to hers. I use Samsung Gallery now because of this. She saw the picture, called me into her room, and started interrogating me. Eventually, she stopped and asked my sister about it. Thankfully, my sister defended me and explained that it was just a game for the girlies. Anyway, thank you for watching.